Hello everyone, this is part 27 of What If Naruto Was the Perfect Shinobi, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Be sure to like and subscribe, it gives me more motivation. Enjoy. Naruto moved along the building tops as he made back towards the hotel, not caring to navigate the people on the streets, even though the mist had thinned enough to navigate. Itachi had kept his word, or so it seemed at least, as he'd noticed neither the Uchiha nor his partner pursuing him. The blonde still didn't trust Itachi, however, not at all. Naruto didn't want to accept his logic, or acknowledge his words as truth. A harsh gale then fell through the air, making the remaining mist in the streets below scatter into the wind. Naruto released the delirious Yugao's wrist and brought his hand up to shield his vision against the biting air. As Naruto did so, a voice he recognized all too well sounded down in the road. "I am not a man to condone stealing. You gentlemen will please surrender that sword now." The wind calmed to a gentle breeze, and the blonde Jinchuriki strode over to his present building's edge. That was Hokage-sama's voice. The third was standing in the street, with both the mutt and that medic Shizune alongside him. The old man stared hard at some low-rank thugs that were grouped in the road. Their leader, a tall man with a topknot that was dressed in normal street attire, was holding Yugao's katana with one hand and examining the blade with a retarded sneer. The Hokage and his two companions were not in the least impressed with him, as the man bared his crooked teeth in a snarl while his miscreant cohorts tried to look menacing. Naruto could have horse laughed at the pitiable ignorance, as though some weak street punks could intimidate the Sandaime Hokage. F that, Gramps. Finders keepers, and cheap-ass magic tricks ain't gonna scare us neither. The man pointed the stolen sword at Sarutobi, enough to seal his doom. Naruto set Yugao down on a level spot and reached into the kunai holster strapped above her ankle. Meanwhile, two punks began to advance on Sarutobi at their boss's signal, cracking their knuckles like idiots. The Jinchuriki measured his aim as one goon threw a punch. The Hokage parried the blow with his walking stick and then spun in place, delivering a harsh strike to his assailant's ear. Even in his distant vantage point, Naruto could hear the loud pop as the man crashed to the ground, howling in torment and kicking like a child while pressing his palm to his busted ear. Too pathetic. Neither Kiba nor Shizune saw need to get involved in the one-sided beating, and the retired Hokage ducked underneath the second man's weak punch, not needing to move much due to his age-shrunken stature. Sarutobi delivered a severe counterstrike to the weaponless thug's knee with his cane and then concluded his attack with an overhand S on his attacker's temple, rendering the luckless goon to a crumpled heap on the pavement. The no-good ringleader reddened with anger and roared at his remaining three minions, waving Yugao's katana at the resolute third. "Sanuvab, that's it. K that meddling old bastard and the others too." The remaining three goons all pulled weapons and advanced on the old man. Sarutobi held his ground and regarded them with a grim expression. Kiba hunched over in what Naruto recognized as an Inuzuka combat stance, while Shizune looked a bit hesitant to raise her sleeve to expose her wrist launcher. The old man gestured the two to stand down, however, and raised his cane again with a resigned sigh. The third's next words could have been aimed at either the thugs or at Naruto, as the Jinchuriki thought that his mentor seemed to glance up at him, where he was taking aim at that exact moment. Foolish children. The thugs didn't even get close to him. A kunai slammed into the leading goon's skull in mid-stride, making him drop his short blade and claw at the air like a poisoned rat. The handle protruded through his cranium as he hit the pavement, oozing blood all over. The remaining two idiots were smart enough to notice that the unexpected attack had originated behind them, and halted and whirled about on the spot. Not in time, however, as one took an oncoming kunai through the heart, the other into the T. The ringleader, now quite alone, went pale with terror and shock upon seeing his men killed. As he looked down at the kunai stuck into his underling's vital spots, the scoundrel realized too late what he was dealing with. Ugh! What in the S? The now outnumbered miscreant turned and tried to bolt, but Naruto materialized behind him and grabbed hard onto his topknot. The man's own momentum kicked back against him and he ended up crashing onto his ass on the pavement. The Jinchuriki pressed the kusanagi against his shoulder, and dragged the tip across to his end, not quite pushing hard enough to draw blood, but still making a point. He could almost see the grease on his hand where it was clenched around the gang leader's disgusting hair. An assault on the Hokage is a capital crime. You should have thought harder, trash. Naruto pushed the tip into the thug's neck a little, causing blood to stream out and down his shirt. His victim squealed in horror and urinated in his pants as the understanding that he was going to sank in. The man bawled as he placed Yugao's katana down on the pavement and reached into his pants pocket to pull out a modest wallet, begging the Jinchuriki to spare his miserable existence. Please, let me go. I'll never do it again. Here, have this sword back, and no, take all I've got. Don't K me. Naruto snorted and pulled the kusanagi back, watching with morbid amusement as the man began to breathe hard. However, seeing a grown man wailing like a newborn did nothing except raise the blonde's ire, and he raised the sword high and brought it down to remove the pathetic creature's head. As soon as the blade began its descent, the retired Hokage moved to stop his protégé with an angered bark. Naruto. The blonde-haired shinobi glowered with irritation and halted his stroke at the last possible moment. Naruto shortened the kusanagi and placed it back in its custom socket on his anbu bracha. He now noticed the sizable crowd that had gathered around the scene, pointing and whispering at him, and at the corpses now bleeding out on the street. Naruto released his hold on the man's top knot, quite aggravated with this spectacle, and shoved him down onto his stomach on the pavement, and would have kicked him like a mongrel had Sarutobi not been watching. Bah! Your luck, chump. The thug scampered down the street as though the Reaper were chasing him. Naruto meanwhile leapt back to his previous perch and retrieved Yugao, attempting to pretend ignorance to the old man's incensed stare. He returned the woman's katana to its proper place inside its sheath at her waist and then hoisted her onto his back again. Ice clawed at his heart when he saw what was there, or perhaps, what wasn't there would have been more appropriate. It's gone. The fourth Hokage's scroll was no longer where he'd last stored it. Naruto knew that he hadn't dropped it somewhere, as he'd have noticed at once. Itachi had stolen it while the Jinchuriki was locked in his illusion. There was no other plausible explanation. For his part, the blonde had been much too preoccupied with making good his escape and with protecting Yugao at that time, as well as with the Uchiha's startling revelations, and hadn't even given a moment's thought to the scroll. Now he understood the reason Itachi had been so willing to let him go. Naruto would have no choice but to meet the Akatsuki member at the appointed time in order to reclaim the invaluable scroll, and the knowledge contained therein was much too dangerous to allow a Nukanon group to possess. Ugh! I've gotten into some deep S this time. Naruto had to crush down the overwhelming desire to leave Yugao with the third and run back to settle accounts with Itachi and kiss him right then and there. However, ignoring even how outclassed he would be against a single Akatsuki member, much less two at once, the demon container also understood that the duo would no longer be at that penthouse. No, Naruto wouldn't locate them again until the designated time. The blonde raked a clawed hand through his hair, hot rage threatening to overcome him again, and returned to the street below. His chest hammered with shame, but his expression showed nothing. The Hokage grunted when Naruto landed near him and gestured towards the near end, and unconscious Kunoichi latched onto his back. You had best explain this mess now, I suppose. The Jinchuriki responded with a dull nod, while Kiba looked at him with something like hero worship. For a long moment, Naruto didn't quite get it, but understood when the mutt glanced at Yugao with a lecherous grin. No doubt he assumed the blonde had pillowed her into a stupor, given her current dress. Naruto didn't bother to correct him, as his mentor was still awaiting an explanation and looking rather impatient to receive it. He placed his burden on the ground and allowed Shizune to begin looking her over. The Kunoichi sent him a rather scathing look as she went to her work, no doubt due to his having ked several men moments earlier, something that her station wouldn't condone. There had to be some opposing logic in being both a doctor and a trained cur at once. Nevertheless, Naruto likewise ignored the brunette and her indignation and instead turned his attention to the old man. Akatsuki attacked us. Itachi and Kisame must have spotted us on the road and tailed us here. Kisame knocked her out and used her as a hostage, but I managed to grab her and make an escape. For some reason or another, the Akatsuki aren't chasing us though. Sarutobi's expression turned to stone as the demon vessel spoke, and he leaned hard onto his cane while stroking his short beard with one hand. I see. So, We were being spied upon back at that restaurant, then. Damn it all, this is the last thing we need. The thought hadn't even occurred to Naruto, who had dismissed those two strange peasants at that restaurant as his rampant paranoia making him see things. Now, however, he seemed to have been onto something back on the road. Thinking back on how the pair look, the two strangers must have been Itachi and Kisame in disguise, and then some ridiculous coincidence had made the Konoha group stumble right into them. Lest the old man suspect something, Naruto revealed one detail pertaining to his escape. I doubt we'll be seeing him again. I'm not sure, but I think Itachi let me go. The Sandaime smiled ever so little, and the blonde wondered what in the hell that could have meant. Naruto didn't quite like the thought that there could be other angles to this mess that he couldn't see, not when it all concerned him so much. He didn't dare ask, however, and Sarutobi seemed to be in no rush to provide an answer. The Sandaime noticed the teenager's continuing stare and abandoned his musings with a tired groan. That cannot be certain. You will remain with the group at all times until we return to Konoha. No more little excursions. The blonde nodded his assent, expecting nothing less though still planning to violate the third's latest command soon enough. Naruto was going to get that stolen scroll back no matter what, and he was going to do it on his own. He couldn't admit to his mentor that he had lost something as valuable as the fourth's inheritance. He was a laughable coward in some respects, who lacked the basic courage to own up to his mistakes. Naruto exhaled a cold breath and moved towards where Shizune was still looking over Yugao, understanding Sarutobi's unspoken dismissal and leaving him to his thoughts. So, I overheard something about spies. The blonde snorted at the mutt's sad attempt at being casual, knowing quite well that Kiba had overheard the whole thing. Naruto stalked around the area, leaning over the bee corpses to retrieve Yugao's kunai. She wouldn't care that he'd used her equipment given the situation, so long as he recovered and cleaned the gear. Premium Shinobi tools were expensive. He used the med victims' clothing to wipe their own blood clean. The Jinchuriki palmed the kunai when he was done with his menial task, and then Naruto at last turned back around to answer Kiba with a pointed, almost sadistic grin. Oh, that's right, Kiba. Your sweetheart back at that restaurant was a man in disguise. Sasuke's older brother, even. Naruto chuckled under his breath, leaving the Inuzuka as his cheeks began to take on a pronounced greenish tinge that made quite the contrast with his red clan markings. Kiba retched, and the blonde leaned over Yugao. Shizune looked up at the demon vessel when his shadow covered her, and her previous spite towards him dissipated a little when he leaned down to touch the unconscious Kunoichi's brow. Her skin was still cold, but she looked to have calmed a bit at least. She should be all right with a little bed rest and medicine, but now we need to get her indoors as soon as possible. Sarutobi's voice re-entered the conversation, deciding the matter. Then it's settled. Return to the hotel, on the double. Naruto, please transport her. The blonde made two shadow clones, and one hoisted Yugao's legs while the other hooked underneath her arms. The clones carried the Anbu Kunoichi back towards the hotel as instructed, with Shizune and Kiba traveling alongside. Naruto couldn't help but hope that she regained consciousness in time to catch the mutt ogling her. Sarutobi remained standing in the street, and the Jinchuriki stopped as he was about to move to return to base, as well. Hokage-sama. Naruto had to suppress a wince at his own voice, as he sounded too much like a dog that had been kicked. He saw the disapproval still etched on the old man's visage, as the third lingered among the thugs, and he couldn't stand it, or understand it. Sarutobi had let him sharpen his skills on these sorts in the past, had even encouraged it, and now he was mad and disappointed about it. Perhaps it was because he was now a Konoha nin, and an Anbu member. Don't apologize. I expected a negative reaction to that news. You must work to stop being so reckless and impulsive all the time, Naruto. This temperamental escapade could have ended in a catastrophe. At this point, Naruto should have admitted the truth about the scroll, but he wavered once more. All the blonde could do was nod and swear a promise that he knew he wouldn't keep, all the while cursing his own cowardice. XXXXXXXXXX. The sewer water soaked Naruto's ankles as he traversed the dark corridor. He'd hoped never to have to enter this wretched place again, but now he had little recourse. He needed to know certain things, and this was the one source he could give him the knowledge he sought. Naruto couldn't ask Sarutobi this time, though it would no doubt have been a much easier course, not without revealing all that Itachi had showed him inside that illusion world. The blonde scowled as he continued to slosh through the sludge. The SI have to go through, literally. The corrupt miasma was much more prevalent than the last time he'd visited his inner realm. Rather than being collected within isolated pools, the black slime was now mixed into the entire domain. Naruto drew his sword as a precaution when the corridor widened into the main chamber, where that twisted prison stood. The cage's sole occupant was none too pleased to see him. A snarling roar boomed through the prison, and a crippling king intent made Naruto go numb with shock, tumbling down into the miasmic sludge. The demon's crimson arm shot through the largest hole in the bars, rocketing towards him with razor-sharp claws extended. The container was powerless to move, locked in place due to the Kyuubi's terrible aura. Two ink-black serpents coalesced within the liquid surrounding him, and shot outward to bind the monster's arm right as it made to impale and crush the blonde Jinchuriki at once. The Biju spat and snarled in rage. Naruto exhaled a relieved breath, even as the demon held the arm loose and pulled the limb back into the prison. A third, much larger chakra snake appeared next to Naruto as he stood, and the blonde stroked its head while staring at the raging monster. The serpent hissed with contentment, and the blonde shinobi wondered to what extent he could now manipulate his cursed seal's literal presence within this place. Now, calm down, old friend. You can't K me, so there's no use trying. Miserable little earthworm. You dare to show your miserable face before me after violating our pact. Naruto turned his head to the side with a pained grimace. The Kyuubi's putrid breath reeked like centuries-old rotten blood and meat, making him want to vomit and scorching his skin. The blonde remained silent, wiping clean the boiling hot spittle that had soaked him through the prison. The demon's saliva had even gotten into his ear. Not willingly, I can promise. You might have information I need. Tell me what you know about Uchiha Madara and I'll leave. The demon's head seethed back at the name, Uchiha Madara. The Biju peered down at Naruto and snorted. The blonde couldn't be certain whether the monster was surprised. However, the gesture was still enough to tell him that his unwilling tenant at least recognized the name, lending credence on some level to Itachi's tale. The nine-tailed monster looked around its cage as though considering the matter, and then snorted at Naruto again, almost causing him to take another spill. Your promises are as worthless as your ever so fragile life, brat. Begone. I will tell you nothing. The great beast slammed a paw into the bars, causing the chamber to quake. This time, Naruto was better prepared and his balance held. The blonde shinobi smiled, as the Biju had told him a great deal right then. His tone turned conversational, and he baited his hook. Well, I heard that he commanded you to attack Konoha 13 years ago, like you were nothing more than an oversized house pet. The Kyuubi bared its glistening teeth, its snarl deepening, and the maddening king intent grew even more intense. Naruto staggered backwards, clutching at his brow with his hand in an attempt to battle the overwhelming pressure. The container broke out into a mocking laugh, righting his orientation again. He knew that he could provoke the demon into giving him the details through exploiting its arrogant pride and continued with that purpose in mind, heedless to the potential consequences. So, it's true then. I get how it is now. A good pet can't divulge the master's secrets. The entire area began to radiate with a crimson glow, and Naruto realized too late that he might have made a mistake. The monster's arm shot through the gap in the bars once more. The black serpent reared back to strike, but the Biju rent it to pieces with a nonchalant swipe and then swept towards Naruto. The blonde leapt over the oncoming paw, but the Kyuubi reached up and plucked him in midair, grasping the Jinchuriki in its massive hand. The nine tails squeezed so hard that Naruto was certain that he'd break to pieces, hauling him ever closer to the cage. The raw Yuki seared his skin. That man was able to facilitate my return to this plane, but make no mistake, brat. The and near destruction of your pathetic little village was my initiative alone. I accept direction from no being, least of all a decrepit, half-s mortal man. Naruto tried to struggle against the demon's death grip, but to no avail. Escape was impossible. Had he been a bit less preoccupied, he would have noticed then that the monster had given him the answer to his question. However, at the moment, Naruto was more concerned with not being eaten. The blonde spoke in a strangled hiss as the malicious Biju tried to angle him through the twisted bars. You wouldn't dare, K me now and you'll S too. Naruto's argument didn't seem to move the demon in the least. The ensnared Jinchuriki reached out with his mind in desperation. Innumerable black chakra snakes emerged and rushed towards the cage, hissing and snapping at the stagnant air within the chamber. The monster regarded the oncoming horde without the slightest concern, and its savage, roaring laughter echoed through the prison. Bah! Useless imbecile. I am eternal. It might take me a millennium to claw my way back out of hell, but I will return. You, however, you can rest assured that I will make you my supper the moment we arrive together in the next world. The demon hurled Naruto across the prison chamber, high over the oncoming snakes. The blonde rolled several meters on impact, and without being able to use his jutsu within his subconscious, he could do nothing. The monster roared, blasting the snakes into pieces through sheer power. You will suffer for all eternity, trapped within my bowels. Enjoy this existence while you still can, for your afterlife shall belong to me. Know this, human. You will curse the hour that you had the gall to defy me. Now leave, and never return to this place again. Having little recourse, Naruto did so, not even daring to glare back at this point. He phased out, evacuating his mindscape with the demon's cruel, mocking laughter pounding in his ears and head. The blonde shinobi was covered in an ice-cold sweat when he emerged back into the real world, sitting against a wall on the terrace outside his hotel room with the kusanagi resting in his right hand. Naruto cracked his N and looked out into the night. He'd been stupid to return to that place, he now realized. He'd gone in thinking that he might have been able to provoke the demon into renegotiating their old accord against a mutual opponent in this Uchiha Madara person, but he had underestimated the creature's rage and overestimated his power over his tenant, and had almost gotten ked as a result. Naruto had burnt his bridge with the Biju that drunken morning, and the damage seemed impossible to repair. Regardless, however, he had managed to gain enough knowledge to make the conclusion that Itachi wasn't telling lies. Now all that remained was to decide how he was going to handle the problem. You're awake. You seem to be having a nightmare. He almost wished that he had been. Naruto hadn't slept more than an hour here and an hour there since that incident, his mind too concerned with the impending slime. The Jinchuriki glanced up at Yugao. The kunoiki was standing over him with a hand on her hip, dressed in a loose black robe identical to the one Shizune wore. Naruto returned his gaze back into the horizon and replied in a dull, listless tone. I guess so. The blonde ran a hand through his hair and popped his N. You're supposed to be keeping watch, however, not taking a nap. The blonde wilted under her unwavering stare, and at last stood with a low grunt. She had recovered well enough. As Shizune had said, a little rest and medicine had set her right. Naruto crossed his arms and rested his spiked head against the wall again, drumming the metal guardrail with his palm in impatience. The container wished that the appointed morning would come, so he could get the unpleasant business done with. The weight was king him, leaving him with nothing to do except stew over possibilities. Uchiha Itachi had no doubt planned that as well, irritating perceptive genius that he was. I don't think it should be called napping at this hour. Midnight had long since come and gone, and the next night would be the last. Yugao ignored Naruto's disgruntled muttering and perched down onto the guardrail opposite him. The plum-haired Anbu leaned over and seemed to peer right through him. Naruto realized at once that she had come outside to do more than chastise him over being inattentive on watch. Tell me what happened last night. You're hiding something important. I can tell. Too damned perceptive, the Jinchuriki groused in his mind. She had seen right through him, and he wondered whether the old man had as well. Sarutobi had done nothing to indicate that he suspected something. The blonde shrugged, hoping that he could deceive her still. He couldn't tell Yugao about the scroll. Naruto knew that she would make him report it to the old man, or do so without asking him, and then he'd be in even deeper S. Nothing worth mentioning happened. You got taken hostage and I got us out, and then met with the third and the others. Naruto winced in response to the look he received in return. He wasn't a scared liar, and now had little doubt that the Sandaime knew that he hadn't been telling the whole truth. However, he had told the old man enough that Sarutobi might have been content to let the matter rest, occupied as he was with having to coddle that rancid old Tsunade. Naruto had managed to evade capture and escape, and perhaps that was all that mattered. Itachi tried to con me into surrendering. I didn't listen. That's all there is to tell. The Jinchuriki wasn't the slightest bit surprised when she didn't believe him. Nor was he too surprised to have a sheathed katana digging into his tea a second later. Naruto had dealt with more intimidating things, and her anger nothing in comparison to a mouse biju attempting to eat him. No longer in the mood to humor her, he showed no reaction to her pointed glare. There's more to it than that. I'm not an idiot and don't treat me like one, grunt. Naruto palmed the covered weapon and pushed it to the side. Relax. No need to get all mad. I'm worried about those two scoundrels turning up here. I'm not hiding things, I promise. That was an outright lie, and once again, Yugao's cold expression indicated that she hadn't believed his claim. However, the plum-haired kunoichi also had nothing to bolster her suspicions, not having a clue about the stolen scroll and thus no reason to suspect what had happened there. She realized this point too, or so it seemed, as she at last nodded. She did, however, shoot him one last cold glare. Quote. Fine, I suppose I'll have to accept that piss-poor explanation. For now, at least. Naruto resisted the urge to sigh when she moved to leave. The blonde watched the woman retreat with mild interest. Yugao stopped in place and turned back towards him upon reaching the door, however, glancing at him over her shoulder to deliver a parting remark. You aren't dealing with this problem alone, though. Keep that in mind. That was the problem, he thought as she walked through the door, leaving him alone. Naruto didn't want or need his important people getting mixed up in his personal issues. Yugao had almost gotten said twice now. The blonde stood quiet until she was long gone and he was certain that she hadn't held back to eavesdrop, and then grumbled under his breath to the heavens, resting his arms behind his head with a mulish expression. Right, not alone. A moment later, the morning's light began to appear on the distant horizon. Time had passed quicker than he'd thought, and he wondered how long he'd been mired in the monster's den. No matter, he decided, as the coming dawn might well be his last as a Konoha nin, or his last period. Tomorrow at this time, he would be meeting Itachi at the ruined Tanzaku castle, and perhaps marching straight into the rogue Uchiha's trap. That much was set in stone. No matter what, I'll kill that bastard. Naruto would have Uchiha Madara's head. He was the one responsible, killing his fourth and making Naruto an orphan, and bringing the demon to Konoha and causing him to become a Jinchuriki. The blonde wasn't an avenger. No, he was quite content to leave such lame bulls to Sasuke, but he would still kill the traitor and eradicate Akatsuki. That much he couldn't do alone, but what mattered most right then was recovering the Yondaim's heritage scroll. He hated to admit it, but he would need the power and knowledge within. I guess I'm stuck being that man's son still, F. The morning sun brightened in the skies overhead, seeming to mock him. XXXXXXXXXXX. The meantime passed with little incident. Yugao hadn't said more than 2 words to Naruto since the exchange on the terrace, content to given the blonde room to breathe. The mutt was asleep, and Sarutobi was still too concerned with his own business to give that much thought to his subordinates so long as Naruto stuck to orders and remained indoors. For his own part, the blonde was spending the last hours at the hotel's downstairs bar. He hated needing to drink in order to steel his nerves, but couldn't help it this time. That's not a good habit to get into at such a tender age, kid. The blonde could have beaten his spiked head against the countertop. The absolute last person he wanted to spend his remaining time with was now here to share his space. Naruto downed the remaining sake in his bottle in 2 large swallows and proceeded to motion the bartender to bring him another. That would be his third. As he waited, the Jinchuriki turned back to regard Tsunade with a narrow expression. You'd know all about that, I'm sure. Tsunade didn't seem to mind the insult, whether about her age or her alcoholism, or perhaps considered Naruto beneath her concern. Rather than answering him, the slug princess instead grabbed his sake bottle when it came and brought the opening to her nose. She inhaled the wine's vapor with a sigh and then returned Naruto's bottle to him, motioning the barkeep to bring her the same. Tsunade took her own bottle and took a long draught, tipping her chin back and making her massive BS bounce. Naruto did his best not to stare, but it was hard to remember that the woman was old enough to be his grandmother, and even more so when she licked her lips while setting the bottle down. Now this is a nice wine. Expensive, too. You must have held onto a bit at the casino. Naruto reached into his robe and pulled out the thug's wallet, tossing it into the air and palming it again on the descent. At this point, the blonde didn't have much problem with his drinking companion. Talking to someone to gave him something to do other than rehash his predicament in his head, as he'd done 1,000 times or more since his last run-in with Itachi. He'd thought about it enough. All that remained was to do it. The Jinchuriki sipped his wine and placed the leather wallet down. No, not quite. A local no-good was generous enough to lend me his wallet a couple nights ago. Tsunade took another deep pull on her sake and her lips curled into a sneer. Ah, that's right. Now that I think back on it, I do seem to remember hearing Shizune mention something like that. Naruto saw the brunette coming down the stairs behind the Sannin, and replied so that the medic would be able to hear him. Tsunade had been the one to bring her name up, so he had no problem with sowing a little chaos between master and pupil. The demon vessel raised his bottle but didn't take a drink, turning towards a window and showing his back to Tsunade and the approaching Shizune. Your assistant wasn't too pleased with how I dealt with that prick's men. The older blonde snorted, draining her bottle and motioning the barkeep to bring another. Yes, she's like that. Shizune's a damn good medic, but an incomplete kunoichi. She's never been able to ignore her heart. She hates needless and dislikes king period. There's nothing worse than a shinobi who shows needless compassion. The Jinchuriki looked back. Tsunade either hadn't noticed her attendant's presence, or hadn't cared. He guessed the latter, given what he presumed to be her overall nature. Regardless, he saw through her insult as well, understanding that it was directed at the third as well as at Shizune. That latter bit her lip and looked downward. Even though Naruto agreed with the woman to some extent, he pleased with hearing the drunken old harlot insult his mentor again. There are worse things, like being a coward and running when things get tough. This time he managed to get underneath her skin a little. Tsunade stood over him and leaned down in an attempt to intimidate him. All she succeeded in doing, however, was presenting him with a clear, unobstructed view down her top that he couldn't help but indulge in. Naruto's little peep show didn't last long. The slug princess reddened, though he didn't notice it, in response his stare, and banged down onto the counter next to him. The ornate wooden bar now sported deep cracks where she'd hit it, and he could hear the porcelain bottles shattering on the ground behind the counter. Naruto was still holding his, however, and it remained intact. Tsunade growled and grabbed his hair, and hoisted him into the air with ease. Shizune, who was still hanging back near the stairs, gasped in horror and retreated back up the steps, perhaps to alert the old man that his subordinate might have a broken N. You'd better watch it, brat. The container sneered back at her and ran a little electric chakra through his hair. Tsunade hissed and released her grip, shaking her hand to dispel the sudden static shock. Naruto returned to his seat and shot her a taunting grin while attempting to tame his ridiculous hair. The chakra had made his blonde spikes stand on end. He gave up soon enough and used a minor henge to hide the problem until he had more time to devote to solving it. Bend over like that again, then. I'd love to keep watching. To Naruto's overwhelming surprise and slight embarrassment, the prospective Godime Hokage did so, almost smothering the teen in exposed cleavage. Tsunade's right hand lashed out in a motion that might have made her old teammate envious and swiped the preoccupied Naruto's sake. The bee knew how to use her assets to her advantage, he had to acknowledge. As soon as she'd gotten her prize, Tsunade turned back around. Her pigtails hit the Jinchuriki on the cheek, whipping against his whisker markings. HMPH. You're as perverted as Sensei. You can become Hokage rather than me. I sure as hell don't need that accursed position. The blushing Naruto could do little about this except scowl at the Sannin's back. Not content with winning all his cash at the casino, Tsunade had to go and swipe his damned booze as well. He supposed that the show had been worth the price, even though the blonde knew it to be an illusion. He thought about ordering another bottle, but saw that the barkeep had vanished during his slight altercation with the kunoichi. No doubt the man had dealt with enough raucous patrons in his time to know when to take a hike. Naruto responded to the woman's rambling declaration with a dark, embittered laugh. I'd be a terrible Hokage. I don't give a s about that village either. For all I care, those people can rot in hell. There were some people that he wouldn't consign to such a thing, but his statement was more or less his true opinion. Tsunade pivoted in her seat and looked back to regard Naruto again, this time with an arm crossed over her chest. The anger had disappeared. Now the medic looked almost sentimental, a total change in attitude compared to what he had come to expect. He thought that he would never understand women. The slug princess spoke in a low, breaking whisper. Minato would have been so heartbroken to hear that. Naruto blinked. That wasn't what he'd expected to hear. The shock turned to indignant rage soon enough. That derelict had no right to guilt him, not when she'd abandoned Konoha and her duties and run out with her tail between her legs to squander the Shodai's inheritance. The Jinchuriki opened his mouth to deliver a blistering retort, but then happened to glance at a near window at the last possible moment. A gentle light seeped inside through the blinds. Well, this is it, then. The boiling anger in his chest turned to cold water. He wouldn't be answering her, and might never have to. Naruto reached into his stolen wallet to count out enough ryo to cover his tab, but then shrugged and dropped the whole thing onto the splintered counter. He made towards the hotel's entrance, all the while knowing that Tsunade was observing him. Shizune had never returned, and he didn't sense Yugao or the Sandaime lurking near either. Naruto's path seemed clear. As he reached the exit, the blonde Jinchuriki looked over his shoulder at Tsunade, knowing that she had no reason to stop him. Time's up. I'm leaving now. I've got an appointment to keep. Don't tell the old man I'm gone unless he asks, please. Naruto threw open the door and stepped out into the morning air without giving the slug princess the time to respond. Tsunade stood once more as the demon container took his leave, and spent a long time staring at the hotel door in puzzled silence when he was gone. However, as he had predicted, the Sannin made no initial attempt to pursue him, and instead returned to her seat, looking down at her purloined wine bottle. At last, Tsunade let out a snort and tossed the sake back in one swallow, voicing a complaint to the still room. Your brat sure is a weird one, Minato-kun. You'd think he was about to go to war. XXXXXXXXXXX. Uchiha Itachi stared up into the skies as dawn broke. He and Kisame were settled on a high vantage point overlooking Tanzaku-gai. Itachi sat in a high crouch atop the old palace's ruined inner wall, while the shark man stood a step behind him with Samehada hoisted over a shoulder. The gaki won't show, Itachi-san. He's not dumb enough to come walking right up to us. The smaller man's attention didn't waver in the slightest when his partner spoke. You're mistaken. He will come. Itachi didn't doubt it in the least, as he reached into his cloud-patterned cloak and palmed Naruto's scroll. The Uchiha was certain that the contents were valuable, having noted the haste that the Konoha nin had taken in concealing the scroll 3 nights prior, but he hadn't attempted to tamper with the docent. There was no need. Itachi didn't need the item except to use it as bait, and not even that in the end. He'd swiped the scroll as added insurance, nothing more. His partner didn't even know about it, much the same as he knew nothing about the Sharingan Master's overall scheme. Kisame couldn't know that Naruto would be leaving this place alongside them, no hostile action needed. He didn't have a clue that Itachi planned to turn against the organization when the time was right, and that Naruto was a crucial piece in that plan. You sure do seem positive about that. I'll believe it when I see it. He'd given the blonde time to stew over his revelations, and all the clues he would need to piece the bigger puzzle together on his own. Itachi didn't need to convince the Jinchuriki. Naruto's logical do that without additional prodding, given the time to think without having his emotions propel him. The slate-haired genius brushed an errant lock aside and replied to his massive partner in his normal quiet monotone. Naruto-kun is similar to me, Kisame. He will do what I would do in his position. That's how I know he'll arrive soon. His demon-enhanced powers aside, Itachi had started to view Uzumaki Naruto as a kindred spirit ever since being given the order to observe him. The two were so similar, being inducted into Konoha's Anbu at tender ages. Both were, once in a decade, true prodigies, who learned to kei and practice the act as small children. Naruto was the one person who could understand him. Due to what was sealed with him, the blonde's sheer potential was unreal, exceeding his own. Itachi desired to witness that obscene strength realized, and coupled with his mind, it would be more than enough to tear Akatsuki to pieces, along with whatever else might oppress the duo. Well, I'll be damned. That kid's got some serious guts, I'll give him that. Itachi hadn't needed Kisame to comment, having noticed the long chakra spike atop the palace's outer wall. The Uchiha motioned his partner to remain behind, and used Shunshin to materialize on the earth, ceding Naruto the height advantage. He removed his kasa and tossed the hat aside. The blonde gazed down at him in suspicion, and then at Kisame still standing atop the inner wall. Itachi looked up at him, showing the Jinchuriki no emotion. You're almost late, Naruto-kun. Naruto held his ground, and likewise held out his hand. You've got something that belongs to me. Toss me the scroll. Resisting the slightest urge to smirk, the older teenager reached into his clock and removed the scroll. He tossed the item up to Naruto, who caught it and placed it inside his own robe, shocked that recovering it had been so simple. Itachi waited on the ground. Naruto had a wide-open escape route. All he had to do was turn and leave, but the Uchiha knew that he wouldn't. The blonde instead leapt down into the castle grounds, landing a little behind Itachi, who motioned Kisame to do the same. The shark nin materialized in a dense mist between the two teenagers and cast a puzzled glance towards his Akatsuki partner. Itachi-san, what in the hell? The slate-haired Nukenin strode past Kisame towards Naruto, who then took an instinctive step backwards, reaching towards his wrist. Itachi deactivated his Sharingan in mid-stride. Most would have thought this to be an insane move, but the Uchiha paid little heed to the potential danger. He knew that he could evade Naruto right now even in his most vulnerable state. The blonde hadn't progressed enough to be able to strike him unless he allowed it to happen. Yet, Itachi moved within Naruto's striking distance and stared right into him. Now is the time to make a decision. The Nine-Tails Jinchuriki didn't move a muscle. Itachi reached into his cloak again and retrieved two items at once, his tanto and a Konoha village headband. The stoic Nukenin held the two items out to Naruto, who glared down at them both with a disgusted glower. He got the implication, and understood at once what Itachi was asking him to do. He made no move to take the sword and protect her. You've got to be kidding me. Kisame echoed the blonde's sentiments, his low growl torn between rage and skepticism. You've got to be kidding me. Itachi, however, said nothing to either and continued to hold the two items out. Naruto's iron will broke down at last and the blonde reached out to snatch the blade and the headband in either hand. The Jinchuriki considered the pair, while the Uchiha placed his hands at his sides and waited in a relaxed, unguarded pose. Itachi was willing to give Naruto all the chance in the world to attempt to KO him, almost daring the Konoha nin to make a hostile move. None came, and the Uchiha spurred on the reluctant demon carrier. Time was essential, and having Sarutobi show up would spoil the entire plan. You know what to do, Naruto-kun. Time is short. You must choose now. The blonde instead turned his back to the Akatsuki duo and withdrew several paces back towards the castle gates. Kisame tensed behind Itachi, seeming to think that Naruto planned to run. The Sharingan wielder checked his overzealous companion with a stern look, and the Jinchuriki soon stopped again. Itachi didn't need his dojutsu to be able to read the emotions running through Naruto. The blonde didn't want to turn his back on his home, but he knew as well as Itachi knew that there was no choice. Naruto took a deep breath and turned to regard the Uchiha once more, and then proceeded to slash a deep horizontal line through the High-Tai-8. He tied on the damaged protector, cementing his new status as a missing nin. Unbelievable. You ought to have saved us a hassle and done this last time, punk. The blonde didn't deign to respond to Kisame, and Itachi once more cut the grinning shark man short. Enough, Kisame. It's time to leave this place. You'll be missed soon enough, Naruto-kun. Naruto blinked as though waking up into a nightmare, and then nodded, tossing Itachi's tanto back as though it were a poisonous serpent, ironic given his choice in jutsu. His mission completed and his own gambit a success, the Uchiha turned his slate-covered head and let out a small smile. Naruto at last spoke in a low, pained whisper. He would acclimate in record time, Itachi was rather certain, adaptive shinobi that he was. Yeah, let's go. Itachi vanished in swirling leaves and appeared atop the outer wall nearest the wood's ringing Tanzaku guy. Kisame shot the blonde Jinchuriki a conspiratorial grin and likewise disappeared. Naruto hesitated one last time and turned his head towards the town. He mouthed something that Itachi couldn't hear, and then Crimson Yuki swirled around him and he materialized alongside the two criminals. The three Nukenin then leapt down into the woods in near unison and sprinted into the wild, leaving the town in their wake. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.